The crew of a passenger jet search in vain for their airport.
Look carefully.
Rain is making it impossible to see.
It's like missed approach. Go around.
More than 200 passengers are on board.
As I turned round, a huge fireball came out.
Investigators search for clues. Could a vital missing piece of equipment be responsible for the crash?
I think the best way to describe that would have been irresponsible.
I know a lot of people could have walked off that plane that night. Nothing will change my views on that.
Nimitz Hill, Guam. Once the site of fierce American offensives during World War II, for over 50 years there's been peace here. Now the hill is peaceful, invaded by hunters. And the normal quiet is broken by the roar of jumbo jets as they fly overhead. Every night, commercial pilots must fly over this tall, rocky outcrop and land at Guam's Agana International Airport. Flights come from airports all across Asia. Just past midnight, on August the 6th, 1997, Korean Airlines Flight 801 is on its way to Guam from Seoul, South Korea. 42-year-old captain Park Young-chol is at the controls. A former Korean Air Force pilot, Park has been flying 747s for more than 6 years. Just a few months ago, he received a Flight Safety Award from the president of Korean Air for successfully handling a 747 engine failure at low altitude. Park is supposed to be flying to the United Arab Emirates tonight, but a scheduling change has put him in command of this shorter flight to Guam. In the cabin, Korean, Japanese, and Western tourists are heading for Guam's pristine beaches. Guam is a U.S. territory run under U.S. law. The island is tiny, fewer than 600 square kilometers, but there's enough sand to keep people coming. "24-year-old Sean Burke and his girlfriend Wendy Bunton are planning to make the most of Guam's beaches. They're flying in from San Diego for a vacation.
Sean and Wendy were going to Guam to do some scuba diving, reef diving, and at the same time, they were going to visit her brother, who was in the Navy over there. He was a Navy doctor.
Flight 801 is taking Barry Small back to work. He's returning to Guam from New Zealand for another 6-month contract as a helicopter pilot. But he does it with a heavy heart.
The night before I left, my father had a heart attack, and I had to CPR him till the ambulance arrived, and decided to cancel the contract so I could help him. But he was insistent that you must carry on with your job.
The flight is still a couple of hours from Guam when the calm evening is brutally interrupted.
Watch the speed. It could be severe turbulence. Make an announcement to have everyone in their seats with seatbelts on.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking.
Even an experienced flyer like Barry Small is surprised.
There was no lead up to this turbulence. I mean, anybody that wasn't strapped down was going to be eaten, that's for sure. The lockers were rattling, and anything in those lockers was bound to break. It was a horrendous shudder.
It's heavy turbulence. But the crew ride it out. Eventually, the flight returns to normal.
We're through it. Let the passengers know.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. We have cleared the turbulent area.
But it's left some of the passengers shaken.
Shh. It's okay, Rika. We'll be there soon.
Ma'am, if you don't mind, I'm gonna move this duty-free up here for you.
The cabin crew cleans up. And the passengers settle in for the rest of the trip.
Because of the 12-hour stopover in Seoul and no change of clothes, it was getting rather uncomfortable in a tropical environment, and I took my shoes off just to relax a little bit and feel more comfortable.
Captain Park and his crew begin looking ahead. They know there's more unsettled weather coming. Rain has been hitting Guam on and off all day. In fact, August is the heart of the island's rainy season. Small showers can pop up, making visibility unpredictable.
In that particular part of the world, they have what's called a top hat thunderstorm. That is a very small thunderstorm that builds up all times of the day, and it's very short-lived, so it wouldn't hamper the pilot's ability to actually conduct the approach. It's going to just obscure his view for some period of time while they're transiting through it.
Just past 1 in the morning, Korean Air Flight 801 makes initial radio contact with Curt Meo, the radar controller at Guam's airport.
Guam Center, Korea 801, leaving level 410 for 2,600.
Korean Air 801, roger.
The crew aren't the only ones preparing to land. After more than 3 hours of flying through the night, the passengers get ready for the airport.
I saw the lights of Guam, and I knew exactly where the aircraft was because I've been there many times before.
Captain Park has navigated Nimitz Hill 9 times before, but this time there's a major difference. At airports around the world, pilots land with the help of a glide slope, an electronic system that helps planes safely touch down. If pilots follow the directions given by the glide slope, it guides them to the foot of the runway. The glide slope beacon at Guam Airport has been removed for extensive maintenance. Without the airport transmitter, Park's glide slope indicator in the cockpit is useless. Landing without a glide slope is rare, but it does happen. In Guam, the transmitter is scheduled to be out of service for more than 2 months. But impaired navigation is only part of the problem. Captain Park is fighting exhaustion.
They make us classic guys work to the maximum. Probably this way, hotel expenses are saved on cabin crews and they maximize flight hours. Really sleepy.
Now, as the plane approaches Guam, clouds and rain block their way.
Captain, Guam condition is no good.
It's raining a lot.
It's been several hours since Captain Park and his crew left Seoul. Now the rain is making the late flight more difficult. Tired and fighting the weather, the captain begins the final approach to the airport. August the 6th, 1997. It's close to 1:30 in the morning. On Korean Airlines Flight 801, a tired captain is preparing to land at Agana Airport on the island of Guam. In the cabin, 237 passengers are getting ready to begin their holidays or get back to work.
The flight, other than the turbulence, was totally normal. We had our meals, and it was just a totally normal flight in every way.
As the jet approaches Guam, an erratic storm pushes rain and clouds between the plane and the airport. It's hard to see. The captain wants to make a small change in course to avoid the worst of the weather.
Request 20-mile deviation to the left as we are descending.
Guam Center, Korean 801, request deviation 10 miles left of track.
Korean Air 801, Roger.
Veering around cloud cover, Captain Park Young-chol struggles to get a clear view of his approach. And finally, he sees what he's been looking for.
It's Guam. Guam.
Good.
Today, the weather radar helps us a lot.
Korean Air 801, cleared for ILS, runway 6, left approach. Glide slope unusable.
Air traffic controller Curt Meo reminds the crew that the airport's glide slope equipment is out of service. It would normally help them find the runway, but since it's under repair, it isn't sending out any signals. Then, with the crew in the middle of their landing sequence, something unexpected happens. The glide slope appears to come to life.
Is the glide slope working? The glide slope, yeah?
Yes. Yes, it's working.
Why is it working?
It's a confusing moment. Unsure what's happening, the crew continue to prepare for their landing.
60 check, gear down.
Check.
Approaching 1400.
Since today's glide slope condition is not good, we need to maintain 1,440. Please set it.
Set.
At 40 minutes after 1 in the morning, Guam controller Curt Meo once again makes contact with the crew.
Korean Air 801, contact the Ganya Tower 118.1.
He passes the plane on to the airport tower and says goodbye in Korean.
안녕히 가세요.
수고하십시오. 118.1.
It's the last time he'll ever talk to the crew of the jetliner.
The guy working here probably was a GI in Korea before.
Aganya Tower, Korean Air 801 to intercept the localizer 6 left.
Korean Air 801 Heavy, Aganya Tower. Runway 6 cleared to land.
Korean 801 Roger, clear to land 6 left.
Flaps 30.
Flaps 30.
As the plane descends, clouds and rain close in again. They've lost sight of the airport.
Look carefully.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're preparing for landing at Aganya International Airport in Guam. Please return your seats to the upright position, fasten your seatbelt, and prepare for landing.
Set 560 feet.
As the plane flies closer to the ground, the crew expects they'll see the airport any second. But the rain makes it hard to see anything.
Isn't the glide slope working? Wiper on.
Then a computerized voice fills the cockpit. It's the ground proximity warning system, which tells the crew they're just 500 feet in the air. But they still can't see the runway.
I've done this flight many, many times before, and when I estimated we're about 30 seconds from landing, I bent down to put my shoes on.
200.
The plane is now just 200 feet above the ground, but still the crew can't see the runway. They're quickly running out of time.
Let's make a missed approach. Not in sight. Not in sight. Missed approach. Go around. Go around. Perhaps.
I had no doubts this was still just a normal landing, and the aircraft went on and was decelerating quicker than normal, but nothing to really alarm me. Things were getting pretty serious then. The aircraft was starting to break apart. I forced myself up to look, and there was just bottles, bags, everything you can imagine was coming out. The only way I can really describe it is like about 1,000 737s landing all at once.
On a wooded hillside in Guam, the shattered plane finally grinds to a halt.
I was too scared to undo my seatbelt at that stage because I was waiting for the next bounce to go over another ravine or whatever was going to happen next.
Miraculously, 11-year-old Rika Matsuda has survived and is virtually unhurt. But her mother is trapped and injured. Barry Small is also injured and terrified that fire is sweeping through the plane.
The fire started in the front and proceeded from the front to the back towards me. There was no floor lighting or anything like that, but the fire was so intense there was no problems to see where I was going.
If help doesn't arrive soon, those who survived the initial crash may be trapped inside the cabin.
Korean Air 801 Heavy, Tower, how do you hear?
Everyone in the cockpit has been killed. But airport authorities still have no idea what's happened aboard Flight 801. Hurt by the crash and desperate to escape the ruined plane, Barry Small stumbles towards an opening in the cabin.
I got back these six seats, and then there was about a 6-foot drop down to the ground. The undercarriage had gone completely. I come across an obstacle that I had to cross because it was the only part that wasn't burning.
Here, go! Get over it!
Rika's mother tells her daughter to get out of the burning plane.
Go now, get out of here. Go. Now go. You must go. Go. You must go now. Go.
The fire is spreading quickly. As passengers struggle to deal with the disaster, rescue workers don't even know the plane's gone down.
The fire engulfed both the Asian gentleman and myself, to the extent that it burnt my arms, and my watch got that hot it was melting into my flesh. and I had to flick it off.
Minutes earlier, Curt Meo had passed the passenger jet onto the local tower controllers. Now he learns it hasn't landed yet.
Approach Aganya. Did Korean Air come back to you?
No,
I cleared him to land, and I don't know where he's at.
he didn't land?
Negative.
Oh my God.
Within minutes, Guam Fire Chief Chuck Sanchez is en route.
I was thinking, my God, 747, where's it at? Is it on island? Is it on sea? What is the plan here?
We both fell off the side of the container and the Asian gentleman disappeared into the jungle. So I rolled over onto my back and I managed to crawl with my elbows. There was still a bit of skin on my elbows left.
Small has a badly broken right leg. He crawls away from the wreckage. Many more people remain trapped inside.
Lying there, it just sounded like a battlefield. It was just like a movie. Things were exploding short of me, going over the top of me. Things were landing beside us on fire. It's just indescribable.
There's only one way for emergency crews to get down to the wreck site, along a single access road that runs beside Nimitz Hill. As they race to the accident scene, rescue workers discover a major obstacle. A pipeline has been ripped out of the ground by the crash and thrown across the road. There's no way around it. Having heard about the crash, the island's governor, Carl Gutierrez, has joined the rescue team.
Engine Company 7, get this thing out of the way. You guys, get the medikits and come with me.
We reached the closest point of approach to the crash site, which was up the hill and probably about another 150 yards downhill. I go, gentlemen, turn on whatever lights you got to guide us down this path, and let's do it.
We started running and just listening to the screams so we can guide ourselves because there was just nothing but overgrowth on the side of the road.
At one point, I stopped him and I go, Governor, sir, I need you to make some serious decision in this operation, and I don't think I want you to move further. I'd like for you to stay on this side, and I don't want you to get hurt. Let us do this job. And he goes, no, I want to help you guys.
At the site of the crash, flames are devouring the wreckage. Hampered by his broken leg, Small can only look on as people cry out for help.
I lay at that bank for the whole night during that time, hearing people call out in a foreign language, which initially sounded like good, healthy calls for help, then turned into screams as the fire got more intense. And after a period of time, the fire even grew worse, and the screams faded away.
Finally, almost an hour after the accident, Sanchez's crew reaches the site.
I split them up into 2 rescue and search units. I need half of you guys to start from the tail end, and I need the other half to start from the front end of this plane. And let's meet in the middle, and let's do what we can to help the survivors here.
Guam's governor, Carl Gutierrez, sees Rika Matsuda all alone and crying out for her mother.
Don't cry, little angel.
be okay.
I did not dare let her go. It's something that I almost like there was a bond between me and that little girl. And I found out later she was 11, but she looked really smaller than 11 years old.
Fire Chief Chuck Sanchez finds Barry Small in the swordgrass.
Take my jacket.
He gave me his fire jacket and put under my head to comfort me.
Here, go. All right, let's go.
Later on, he was very distressed that he had to come back and get it back because he was getting burnt, dragging people and bodies out of the aircraft.
We were cutting trees to use for splint. We were taking off our protective gears to cover the survivors.
It's clear to rescue personnel that for many, they've arrived too late. But Sanchez isn't giving up. He sends a team to search further into the wreckage.
Group 2, start at the tail and work forward. Go.
All I heard was this large explosion, man, right where they were at. Then I go, did we lose our people?
A Boeing 747 has crashed on a rugged hillside in Guam, just a few miles short of the airport. There were 254 people on board. Rescue workers comb through the wreckage when an explosion rips through the remains of the plane.
No radio transmission at all. We lost all transmission, and then finally somebody came out. Sir, we're okay. We survived the explosion. Everybody's accounted for.
It's not until the dawn finally comes that rescue workers can see the extent of the damage. The plane has spilled down the mountain and broken into several large pieces. Only 26 people survived the disaster. Friends and family are desperate for any news. Many bodies are badly burned. Although most of the passengers are Korean, Sean Burke and his girlfriend Wendy Bunton are among a few Americans on the flight. Thousands of kilometers away, news of the crash reaches Sean's parents. When she hears about the crash, Sean Burke's stepmother doesn't know if Sean is alive or dead.
He could have been burned in the crash. He could be unconscious in a local hospital there, and we just wanted to go over and bring him back. So, I mean, because that kept going through our mind that he possibly could be laying on the hillside.
Since Guam is an American territory, the responsibility for investigating the crash falls to the National Transportation Safety Board. Greg Fife is the lead investigator. When he arrives on the site, he has to contend with more than just the carnage of the plane crash. Grieving family members surround the scene, making it especially difficult for investigators to work.
As an accident investigator, you have to keep your emotions in check. It's like being a doctor in an ER room. You see this devastation, you see this tragedy unfolding in front of you. you hear about all of the sad stories, especially when there are kids and innocent people involved. And as an accident investigator, you have to keep those emotions in check because you have to remain objective, you have to remain emotionless to be able to do your job effectively.
And we had a whole building full of people just like us. They were all grieving and crying out. It was just horrible.
One of the first things we did was we went out on site and we did what we call a site survey. We had to really get an understanding of what we were dealing with as far as the wreckage and how we were going to conduct the on-scene investigation.
During the preliminary investigation, Fythe finds that large sections of the plane are almost completely intact.
The airplane landed relatively under control. That is, that the pilot basically landed the airplane into the trees and into that terrain. Unfortunately, it was 3 miles from the airport.
Investigators find a number of items that survived the crash and the fire that followed, including the landing chart the crew was using as it approached Guam Airport. Investigators also find Captain Park's travel bag, and in it discover a small plastic pill container. Captain Park had been prescribed a variety of drugs, including pills containing benzodiazepine, a class of drugs often used as a sedative. The pills and tissue samples from Captain Park's remains are sent for analysis. The landing chart becomes part of a growing pile of evidence. Using information from the jet's flight data recorder, investigators recreate the plane's flight path. The relatively gentle slope of its descent supports Fythe's belief that the jet all but landed on the hillside. But the flight path shouldn't look like this.
Korean Air 801 cleared for ILS runway 6 left approach. Glide slope unusable.
Korean 801, roger, clear for ILS runway 6 left.
The crew had been told that the glide slope at the airport wasn't working. It meant that the captain had to take more manual control of his plane.
It is now up to the pilot to fly an established procedure called a step down, where he starts at an altitude of, say, 2,000 feet. When he gets to a particular point located by what they call DME, or distance measuring equipment, he then starts a descent to another prescribed altitude.
If the crew was following the step-down procedure, its flight path would resemble a set of stairs. But after the first step, the plane enters a long, slow descent.
If you don't hit those step downs, and those altitudes are prescribed to give you terrain clearance, if you don't fly that as depicted on the approach chart, you run the risk of flying into an obstruction or high terrain.
The plane's cockpit voice recorder has also been recovered from the debris. Fythe and his team begin to analyze it, hoping to better understand what happened in the cockpit.
Set 560 feet.
On 2 separate occasions, Captain Park gave orders to descend long before he was supposed to. But there are other clues on the tape as well.
The cockpit voice recorder provided us, the investigators, quite a bit of information. One of the key elements that we found was that the flight crew appeared to be tired.
Really sleepy.
This was a chartered flight, so it would have put them on what we call backside of the clock flying. That is, they wouldn't be normally flying during the day, they are now flying at night. And typically your body says you should be asleep when it's dark outside.
The sedatives could have made a difficult situation even worse. But when the lab results come back, they're conclusive. While he had the pills with him, there are no traces of them in Captain Park's system. When lead investigator Greg Fythe returns to the cockpit voice recorder, he focuses on the captain's discussion of the glide slope.
Is the glide slope working? The glide slope, yeah?
Yes. Yes, it's working. Why is it working?
He started to see the glide slope needle move a little bit and started to question the other crew members as to whether or not the glide slope was actually working or not.
It's early in the morning. After a long flight, Captain Park is tired, perhaps confused and distracted by the unexpected readings on his glide slope.
It became very apparent listening to the cockpit voice recorder that in fact he got fixated.
But Fife still doesn't understand why Park's glide slope appeared to be working. Was there a problem on this plane? Or is the equipment susceptible to problems that could affect other jets as well? To find out, he brings in navigation expert Nelson Spornheimer.
I spent some time looking at the transcript, trying to determine what the navigation issues were, why a good airplane was in the wrong place, and to investigate the apparent confusion on the part of the crew who thought that the glide slope was working at least part of the time.
Spornheimer sends a team of investigators to Guam. They fly over the island, trying to determine whether radio signals from a nearby military base could have acted on the plane, making it seem like the glide slope was working.
Glide slope receivers can respond to non-glide slope signals, particularly when the intended glide slope signal is absent. If there are spurious signals on the channel and they contain the right information, they can cause intermittent movements of the glide slope needle.
Set 560 feet.
But the signals wouldn't be sustained. Like a light switch turning quickly on and off, the glide slope indicator would give periodic indications that it was working, but not for long.
My conclusion was that spurious signals, whether they be from other transmitters or failed ground equipment such as personal walkie-talkies, could not cause a sustained warning flag movement.
If the glide slope wasn't fully operating, why did Park believe it was? And even if he did believe it was working, why did he crash into Nimitz Hill?
Isn't the glide slope working? Wiper on.
As investigators continue to try to piece together the causes of the crash, Barry Small is trying to understand why he and 25 others survived.
I went to touch my shoes, we hit the ground, and I was accidentally in the perfect crash position by some sort of miracle.
An airline engineering apprentice and helicopter pilot, Small understands airplanes.
I do firmly believe there are some changes that could be made to aircraft.
Small believes that the way crossbars are built into aircraft seats caused one of his legs to break, but luck saved his other leg.
My right leg went forward and crashed into the bar in front of the seat and broke. My left leg was saved by my carry bag stopping my leg going forward and hit that bar.
Still able to walk on his one good leg, Small escapes while others remain trapped inside. Since she's young, Rika Matsuda's legs are shorter than a normal adult. Sitting normally, her legs wouldn't have been pressed against the crossbar on impact, so she was able to escape the plane.
Oh, go now, get out of here.
While her mother died. Small is also convinced that the flames that first spread through the cabin of Korean Air Flight 801 were preventable.
They estimate that those top lockers had over 462 litres of burnable alcohol on board. Had the plane been full, there could be at least twice that amount.
During the crash, Small believes that the duty-free alcohol mixed with oxygen in the plane's ceiling. The combination ignited with deadly results. It's a fire he thinks could have been prevented.
Why have this risk, alcohol and oxygen? I thought, for aircraft's about safety, and this is just a blatant breaking of the rules of safety as far as I'm concerned.
As he continues to recover from the accident, Small is determined to prevent what had happened to him from happening to others. He decides to push for changes on how seats are made and how duty-free alcohol is stored. For NTSB investigator Greg Feith, the biggest question still remains. How did an experienced pilot, one recently honored by his company for his safety record, crash his plane 5 kilometers short of the airport? As the investigation continues, he discovers that the landing chart the crew was using was more than 6 months old and out of date. It's an indication that the crew could have been better prepared for the landing. When he reviews the training practices for Korean Airlines, Feith uncovers more gaps in the information that the crew received.
We found that the Korean Airlines flight crew had all of their training based on airports with approaches where the DME was always co-located at the airport.
DME is distance measuring equipment, electronic beacons that tell pilots where they are in relation to the airport. Often the final beacon is found at the foot of the runway. That was not the case in Guam. The airport was in fact 5 kilometers further on. Struggling to see through the rain, Park was unable to find the airport. Distracted by the unexpected glide slope readings, Park used the final beacon as a guide, expecting it to take him right to the runway.
Let's make a missed approach. Not inside. Not inside. Missed approach. Go around. Go around. Perhaps.
It's clear that Flight A01 flew an approach about 3 miles premature. In other words, the descent was about 3 miles early. It was a nominal approach otherwise, just to the wrong location.
We think that based on fatigue and some of their training, that in fact, when the flight crew crashed the airplane, when the counter got to 0, they thought the airport should be there.
A fully loaded 747 weighs more than 200,000 kilograms. Like an enormous ocean liner, it can't change course quickly. Blinded by rain and relying on their equipment, the crew of Korean Air Flight 801 thought they were heading straight at the runway. When they realized something was wrong, it was too late. As the investigation continues, Feith and his team make a startling discovery. Equipment that would have given the crew more time to react had been disabled on purpose. In August of 1997, the crash of Korean Air Flight 801 took the lives of more than 200 people. The final accident investigation report is published more than 2 years after the crash. It lays blame on the Korean Airlines training methods and the crew's over-reliance on the jet's automation. But it also has sharp words reserved for the FAA, the body that regulates air travel in the United States. Because of an FAA decision, a critical piece of technology that could have saved Flight 801 was intentionally disabled. The Minimum Safe Altitude Warning System, or MSAW, is a standard piece of equipment at major American airports. But in Guam, the FAA had made a critical alteration to the way it was used. MSAW uses radar to watch the planes as they come into the airport. If they're too low, a warning is given to air traffic controllers, who can then relay it to the crew. But in Guam, the system kept giving nuisance readings to controllers.
The controllers kept getting these nuisance warnings. They redesigned the software and moved the limitations of the MSAW further away from the airport, where it afforded no one a level of protection.
Instead of watching the planes as they neared the airport, the system in Guam now tracked them when they were more than 80 kilometers away over the ocean.
I think the best way to describe that would have been, and should be, irresponsible. Because you've taken this system that was designed as a level of protection, not only for the controller, but you've taken the protection away from the flying public.
For the passengers and crew of Flight 801, the lack of the MSOR system sealed their fate. If the system had been working, the crash could have been avoided. Without it, the crew had no warning at all.
The two pilots didn't want to die. They had families. No one wanted to die. We still do not blame them. The bottom line is nobody wanted to be in that situation. It was just something that happened.
For Barry Small, the years since the crash of Flight 801 have been emotional and frustrating. The Civil Aviation Authority in his homeland of New Zealand has acknowledged the potential danger posed by duty-free liquor on board, but so far no policies have been changed. His desire to modify airplane seat design has also been ignored.
I have taken several steps to put this idea forward, and in a lot of cases it's initially met with enthusiasm, but it eventually ends up in the too hard basket. And when I try to approach seat design people, no one wants to hear about it.
Sean Burke was never officially identified as a victim of Flight 801. Wendy Bunton was positively identified, but DNA samples only proved that a white male was on the plane near her.
Bill and I never gave up hope that Sean had survived the crash. Even after we came home for, I would say, a year or two, every time the phone rang, every time somebody knocked on the door, we expected a phone message saying, "Hi, Dad, this is your son, Sean."
Eventually, several years after the crash, Barry Small was able to give Kathy Burke and her husband some sense of finality and an enduring image of their son.
When we met him, and he wanted to tell us that in the 12-hour layover in Seoul, he was wandering around and finally heard two people speaking English. And he said they were so much in love that he did not want to interrupt their conversation.
For Sean's father, the deep sorrow of the crash will never completely leave.
For me, the grief of Sean's loss never ends. Hasn't gotten better, hasn't gotten worse. Just another day. For everybody else, it's gone. You know, I expect people to move on, but I'll be this way till the day I'm with him again.
For Barry Small, there is anger too, but also incredible gratitude for surviving.
So many people have told me that I survived for a reason. I've been searching for that reason for 9 years now. And I truly believe if someone would listen to my story about the oxygen and alcohol and the improvement of the seats, that I could justify in my own mind that I don't have to feel guilty about surviving.
The Boeing 737 is one of the most popular passenger jets in the world. Around the globe, the plane has carried more than 12 billion passengers. It's the backbone of the aviation industry. But in 1991, something happened on board a 737 that sent shudders through the world of aviation.
Oh my Lord.
A deadly crash has investigators scrambling.
There was a time when I had doubts that we'd be able to solve it.
It was like he was tracking a serial killer.
The hunt for answers will take 10 long and grueling years. The fate of the airline industry hangs in the balance. And the mystery isn't solved until more than 150 people are dead. (9:40 a.m., March the 3rd, 1991. After a short 17-minute trip from Denver, United Airlines Flight 585 is on final approach into Colorado Springs. It looks like a perfect day for flying, but there's trouble in the air.
Nice looking day. Hard to believe the skies are unfriendly.
There's been heavy turbulence during the flight, and violent gusts of wind are forecast over Colorado Springs.
Never driven to Colorado Springs and not gotten sick?
At the controls is 52-year-old Captain Harold Green, a pilot with 20 years' experience and a sterling reputation. Green's co-pilot is Patricia Eidson. At 42, she's one of the first female flight officers in United's history.
Flight attendants, prepare for landing.
At Colorado Springs Municipal Airport, Air Traffic Controller James Rayfield is ready to bring Flight 585 in.
United 585, report the airport in sight.
Got it?
Yep.
Airport in sight, United 585.
Lower landing gear.
United 585 is cleared for a visual approach to runway 35. Weather conditions, wind 320 degrees at 16, gusting at 29.
As its speed decreases, Flight 585 becomes more vulnerable to the turbulence. Eidson wants to know what other planes have experienced on landing.
Any reports lately of any loss or gain of airspeed?
Yes, ma'am. 500 feet, a 50-knot loss. At 400 feet, a 50-knot gain. And at 150 feet, a gain of 20 knots.
Sounds adventurous, thank you.
Starting on down.
Less than 3 kilometers from the airport, retired policeman Harold Darnell is on his way to a local flea market. A kilometer overhead, Green and Eidson focus on keeping their speed constant as they descend.
Wait, a 10-knot change here.
Yeah, I know. Awful lot of power to hold that airspeed.
As United 585 approaches the runway, Darnell feels something strange.
Oh, what the heck was that?
Out of nowhere, a powerful gust of wind strikes his vehicle, almost blowing him off the road.
Another 10-knot gain.
3 flaps.
From the control tower, James Rayfield can now see Flight 585's final approach. As the aircraft closes in on the airport, the ride gets even bumpier.
Well, we're at 1,000 feet.
Then, without warning, the 737 starts to spin out of control.
Oh, God, slip! 15 flaps! 15!
Oh, no.
Oh, my God!
Rescue workers arrive within minutes, but there's almost no sign of the 737. The shattered remains of the 38-ton jet lie buried in a fire-blackened impact crater.
The plane didn't skate or bounce, you know, like when a plane comes in normally and lands. It just nosed right in, and where it hits, where it stayed.
And I came down here, and this is when I saw all of the, it was horrible.
There are no survivors. All 20 passengers and 5 crew members are killed instantly by the high-speed impact and exploding jet fuel. In 10 violent seconds, Colorado Springs has become the site of one of the most mysterious air crashes in aviation history. By nightfall, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board descend on Colorado Springs. Known to insiders as tin kickers, NTSB investigators examine over 2,000 aviation accidents a year, at times by picking through the metal debris of fallen aircraft. While coroners mark the location of human remains in red, NTSB investigators mark scraps of metal in yellow, looking for clues to help them solve the mystery of Flight 585. Like investigating a mass murder, it's a tough job walking onto a crash site. Among the investigators assigned to the case is Malcolm Brenner, a specialist in human performance. His job will be to find out if the crash was caused by pilot error.
The area was cordoned off by police, and there were Salvation Army trucks. I got a cup of coffee, a cup of hot chocolate or something, and I thanked them for it, and they said, "No, no, thank you." And they had this look in their eyes like, "My God, you have to go into this site."
Clues to the fate of United 585 lie mangled in a deep black hole. The fuselage is crushed like an accordion in the impact crater. The rest of the plane is in pieces spread over an area smaller than a football field.
There was a lot of fire damage. There had been a fire afterwards, and it was all contained in a relatively small area, which just initial impression, it can be a sign that the airplane was intact. If there was a mid-air explosion or something came off the airplane, you'd expect that to be a much larger site.
My first sense that it was going to take some time to investigate the accident was the damage that we saw in the parts. When they're burnt and broken, the process always takes longer.
But with their work just beginning, members of the NTSB have no clue that the case of United 585 will become the longest crash investigation in aviation history. A clear late winter day in 1991 turned deadly in just 10 short seconds. Moments from landing in Colorado Springs, United Airlines Flight 585 fell out of the sky at 370 kilometers per hour. Crash! Crash! All 20 passengers and 5 crew members died. The National Transportation Safety Board begins a painstaking investigation into the crash. Engine turbines, hydraulic pressure gauges, the cockpit voice recorder, and in-flight data recorder are all carefully extracted from the site, photographed, and sent to the lab for analysis. An important first step in the investigation is the analysis of the cockpit voice recorder. With pilot error a factor in 70% of air disasters, Malcolm Brenner's job is to see what role pilots Green and Eidson played in the crash.
This crew was And I felt this at the time, was one of the more impressive crews I'd ever dealt with. There was a little bit of tension release, a little bit of humor. The captain said,
"Never driven to Colorado Springs and not gotten sick?"
The first officer suggested that they add extra speed as a safety margin. The captain agreed with it. It was good interaction.
Got it?
Yep.
Airport in sight, United 585.
Lower landing gear.
This is a sense of an excellent crew, caught randomly, if anything. So again, that was my first impression, is that this would be consistent more with a hardware situation.
As more about Flight 585 becomes known, mechanical failure becomes a serious suspect. Just seconds before it crashed, the plane rolled onto its back and spun wildly out of control. Investigators wonder if the sudden motion was caused by the plane losing an engine or a wing. From the state of the aircraft on site, it's clear that it was intact at the time of the crash. What investigators don't know is if the engines were still working at impact. Technicians examined the engine turbines. They discovered dirt has been drawn deeply into every crevice. These blades were clearly spinning and sucking in air at the time of impact. The engines may have been running, but technicians aren't sure how well. The plane's hydraulic pressure dials are destroyed, their glass covers broken. The indicator needles have been snapped off by the force of the impact, but even these ravaged dials tell a tale.
15 flaps! 15!
On close inspection, investigators find a critical mark. At the moment of impact, a dent was made on the faceplate by the jarred indicator needle. It proves that when United 585 crashed, its engines were running normally. With engine failure ruled out, there seems to be only one other mechanical explanation for why 585 suddenly rolled over and then fell out of the sky. It appears increasingly likely that the plane had suffered a catastrophic problem with its flight controls. Investigators quickly become suspicious of the rudder at the back of the tail.
We focused in after eliminating other flight control surfaces that we thought could contribute to the roll. We started looking at the rudder.
Bring that up so I can take a look at it.
Investigators begin their examination of the rudder on site, but the violence of the crash makes the job extremely difficult.
Almost nothing left.
Most of the plane's parts are too crushed or burned for testing, but a vital component is still reasonably intact. The Power Control Unit, or PCU. Used constantly during flight, especially during landings, the PCU performs like a car's power steering. When the pilot pushes on a rudder pedal, the PCU uses hydraulic fluid to convert gentle movements of a pilot's foot into the pressure needed to move the 737's enormous rudder. The heart of the PCU is something called the dual servo valve. Shaped like a soda can, it has two slides which glide past one another, directing the flow of pressurized hydraulic fluid that moves the rudder.
This servo valve is very unique, that it is, in effect, two valves in one, and that creates a whole range of interactions that don't occur in a more conventional hydraulic valve.
When a technician opens the power control unit, chips of metal are found floating in the hydraulic fluid. It's a disturbing find. These particles could cause the servo valve to jam, making it impossible to work the plane's rudder. It's a chilling prospect. Could a microscopic fault bring down a 38-ton jet? It's difficult for Phillips to tell. While more intact than much of the wreck, The PCU and dual servo valve are both damaged.
The airplane crashed and burnt in a pretty confined area, and there was a lot of damage to the flight control components and the things we were testing and needed to test and look at. The more damaged the components are, the harder it is to take measurements and do functional testing.
To test what he does have, Phillips travels to California, to the labs of Parker Hannifin, where the rudder control unit is made. The curious metal chips floating in the PCU's chambers are dismissed. Phillips is told that filters keep them out of the delicate servo valve that directs fluid and moves the rudder. Nothing else is found that could explain any sudden movement of the rudder on Flight 585.
We didn't have any absolute indication or information that we could point to that said the rudder power control unit, the servo valve, or any part of that flight control system caused that accident.
Phillips still suspects a mechanical problem, but with no conclusive evidence that the PCU or servo valve caused the crash, he's forced to sign off on the tests.
It's a pass.
With Phillips at a dead end, only bad mountain weather remains as a primary suspect. An expert on weather-related aviation accidents, Greg Salatolo is trying to determine if heavy winds on the day of the crash were a factor.
There is a history of events where there have been airplane accidents attributed to mountain waves or rotors. In 1966, a BOAC 707 near Mount Fuji disintegrated in a mountain wave and rotor.
High winds crashing over mountain peaks leave so-called wind rotors in the lee side. Invisible, highly turbulent downdrafts that come plunging down with devastating power and are extremely dangerous to aircraft.
We found a great deal of evidence looking at the surface upper air data and talking to witnesses in the area that rotors were a possibility.
An explosion, it was right over there.
Salatolo hears several eyewitness reports of bizarre mountain weather on the day of the crash. One of the most intriguing is from Harold Darnell,
Oh, what the heck was that?
whose truck was struck by a powerful gust of wind just moments before 585 crashed. But as Greg Salatolo combs through his evidence, the theory that a wind rotor knocked the plane from the sky is getting less and less likely.
Nice looking day. Hard to believe the skies are unfriendly.
Wind rotors are areas of extremely low barometric pressure. So if Flight 585 did pass through one, its altimeter reading would have spiked as the plane was blown suddenly upwards.
There was no evidence that we saw that on the flight data recorder of 585.
What the flight recorder did show was a fast and deadly drop in altitude as the plane fell to Earth. It's been 21 months since the investigation into the crash of United Flight 585 began. Almost 2 years in which the NTSB has studied the crew, the weather, the rudder, and thousands of other pieces of evidence. They've come up empty-handed. For only the 4th time in its history, the NTSB releases a report which doesn't reach a conclusion. The cause of the crash of Flight 585 is undetermined.
We had put a lot of time and effort into the investigation, and we just weren't sure what had happened.
It was like he was tracking a serial killer. He was frustrated that they had not solved 585. He did not want that to happen again.
But almost 2 years after the report on 585 is released, the killer strikes again. At 7 p.m. on a clear, windless day, US Air Flight 427 is nearing Pittsburgh. Captain Peter Germano and First Officer Chuck Emmett are getting ready for their final approach.
Folks, from the flight deck, we should be on the ground about 10 more minutes. Sunny skies, a little hazy. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing. I ask you to check the security of your seatbelt. Thank you.
US Air 309, descend and maintain 6,000.
As they close in on the airport, the pilots are on the lookout for another flight about 10 kilometers ahead of them.
Looking for the traffic. Turning 100, US Air 427.
I see the jet stream.
As they pass through the turbulence left behind by the other flight, their jet suddenly and alarmingly rolls left.
Hold on, hold on. Hold on. Shoot!
Nothing the pilots do seems to have any effect.
What the hell is this? What the? Go! Shoot! God. 427, emergency! Oh, shoot. Oh! Oh, God! Oh, God, no!
Rescue crews arrive quickly, but the fate of Flight 427 is tragically clear. There's no hope for the 132 passengers and crew. The human carnage is so bad, authorities declare the crash site a biohazard.
US Air 427 accident was the first US accident where biohazard suits were used, and it made it more difficult. They were uncomfortable, they were hot, and to this day, when I put on a pair of rubber gloves, for any reason, I'm instantly transformed back to the site in Pittsburgh.
Captain John Cox, a 737 pilot and a flight systems specialist with the Airline Pilots Association, is asked to join the team investigating the crash of Flight 427. As coroners attempt to collect human remains, NTSB lead investigator Tom Houter already knows his hunt for clues will be long and painstaking.
When we first arrived at the crash site, well, first of all, there was no aircraft there. There were only bits and pieces of the airplane. It wasn't really recognizable as an airplane.
With the help of eyewitnesses, information from the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, investigators begin to quickly see some striking similarities between 427 and the unsolved case of United 585. In fact, they seem to be mirror images of each other. On final approach, United 585 rolls right, while US Air 427 rolls to the left.
Oh, God, flip! Hang on.
Both crews are caught by surprise, and after just a few terrifying seconds, both aircraft plummet straight into the ground.
Certainly the whole team was aware of the previous accident with United 585 in Colorado Springs. We try to keep that in the back of our minds and take a look at this one as to what it presents to us.
As the investigation continues, the list of similarities grows. 427's engines were also attached and functioning at the time of impact. But for all the similarities, there's one important difference. Unlike United 585, as US Air 427 approached Pittsburgh, weather conditions were dead calm.
Folks, from the flight deck, we should be on the ground about 10 more minutes. Sunny skies, a little hazy.
Taking a look at the flight data recorder information, the aircraft's approaching Pittsburgh. It's an extremely smooth night. There's just no turbulence at all. The pilots are relaxed. They're talking about the landing.
Flight attendants, please prepare for landing. I ask you to check the security of your seatbelts. Thank you.
As he did in the case of United 585, Greg Phillips will once again lead the investigation into the mechanical aspects of the crash. Almost immediately, he makes a promising discovery. Miraculously, much of US Air 427's tail and rudder appear intact. The hydraulic devices inside the tail have also sustained very little damage. Phillips and Houter prepare to send the parts to the manufacturer, Parker Hannifin, for testing as soon as possible. They need answers. Pressure on the NTSB to solve the accident is growing quickly. Not only are the crashes of flights 585 and 427 disturbingly similar, both of them involve the same kind of airplane, a Boeing 737. But with serious questions being raised about the plane's safety, billions of dollars, and perhaps the airline industry itself, are at risk.
We couldn't live with the fact as investigators of having two unsolved 737 accidents. The airplane is in too much use, too wide a use around the world. It carries too many people every day. Unsolved was not an acceptable answer.
If 427 was an undetermined accident, we could not find the cause of this accident, there was a great chance that if there was a third accident with the 737 fleet under similar circumstances, that the 737 fleet would have been grounded.
Careful with it.
The investigation into the crash of Flight 427 may be the most important in the history of the NTSB. But it won't be easy. Answers are still years away. In just 3 years, 2 Boeing 737s have crashed in the United States with no survivors.
Site United 585.
In both cases, the planes were moments from landing.
Flight attendants, please prepare for landing.
And in both cases, the planes were under full power, but the pilots were unable to control their jets. In the crash of United Flight 585, NTSB investigators were unable to find a cause. Now they're searching for clues into the second crash, US Air Flight 427.
As the investigator in charge, I never allowed myself to think this investigation could go undetermined. We kept on pushing and kept on researching. As long as we had things to research, we kept on going.
To find their killer, the NTSB can't afford to rule anything out. From the possibility that a collision with birds brought 427 down, to strange, even bizarre theories.
They looked at electromagnetic interference. They got calls from people saying it might be Russian death rays. They considered everything.
There were a couple of witnesses who gave reports of the aircraft suddenly descending and hovering before it blew up. We discounted those.
But the investigation's primary suspect is the dual servo valve, part of the power control unit that moves the 737's rudder, and a suspect in the crash of United 585. Parker Hannifin made the valve. At its lab in California, investigators look inside the main cavity of the US Air power control unit. Just like in the earlier crash, they find tiny chips of metal floating in the hydraulic fluid. But once again, Parker and Boeing repeat their claim. Filters designed to stop any debris from interfering with the delicate metal slides have done their job. Investigator Greg Phillips wants to be absolutely sure. If the chips were blocking the slides, they would have left tiny scratch marks behind where they rubbed against the metal. But Phillips can't find any.
Another pass. Okay.
Phillips has technicians put the servo valve from Flight 427 through as many tests as he can think of, trying to find a weakness. If he can find one, it could explain why 2 planes were ripped from the sky. But he comes up empty.
That unit passed all its operational tests. There wasn't any indication that it had failed, and it operated within the parameters we expected it to.
Once again, the investigators are forced to shift their focus back to the pilots. By studying the plane's flight data recorder, investigators know that the jet's rudder was deployed fully to one side, what's called rudder hardover.
We were definitely focused on rudder, on hardover rudder, full rudder input for about 20 seconds. It can be caused either by hardware, something unknown in the hardware, or it can be caused by pilot input.
First Officer Chuck Emmett, who was flying 427, did indeed step down hard on his rudder and then held it there while the plane plummeted towards the Earth. It raised a grisly question. Was he trying to fly the plane into the ground?
And looking at this, and being a pilot myself, is like, this doesn't seem like rational behavior.
What the hell is this?
Human performance specialist Malcolm Brenner listens closely for evidence on the cockpit voice recorder.
What the hell? Shoot!
In this case, they had microphones right by their mouths, and you can hear as well as in real life or better. You can hear breathing sounds.
Yeah, I see the jet stream.
The cockpit recordings indicate that Flight 427's troubles began at the moment it flew through the jet wake of a Delta Airlines 727 that had just passed in front of them.
Both pilots are startled by the wake.
I see the jet stream.
The first officer breaks off at the end of a sentence. I see the jet stream, and there's no more discussion of the jet stream or anything else. They both focus. Something happened here. Captain says, "Sheesh."
It was such a smooth flight that it was the momentary jolt that they just hadn't anticipated. And with that, the pilots got on the controls and immediately, put in a rudder input.
The cockpit recorder even records the thumping sound of the jet stream turbulence as 427 flies through it. As Flight 427 encounters the turbulence, Brenner hears something unusual. First Officer Emmett begins to grunt.
The grunting is unusual. The controls are designed so that pilots don't need to grunt. They're specially designed around human capabilities. So to have someone grunting is typically a sign of emergency.
By matching data from the flight recorder with the crew's voices, Brenner is able to confirm that Emmett's grunts begin a split second after he pushed down on the rudder pedal, and 3 to 4 seconds after the wake turbulence affected Flight 427.
What the? Go help!
On their own, the cockpit voice recordings prove very little. But it seems clear that the crew weren't trying to crash their plane. Something happened which took them by surprise. They reacted as quickly as they could, but nothing they did seemed to help.
What the hell is this?
It's been almost 2 years since the crash of Flight 427, and the investigation has stalled. Now 2 737s have gone down in startlingly similar ways, and investigators still don't know why.
We were all frustrated as months wore into years. What were we missing?
It definitely took a toll in their personal lives. They worked incredibly long hours. They never stopped thinking about it.
We were going up against an aircraft that had an incredible safety history. It was really everything you could see for 30 years. This has been a great airplane. We were trying to prove that there was something wrong with the straight-A student.
It clearly was on his mind. He, at one point, had a nightmare about it where he dreamed that he was in front of a congressional committee that was grilling him on now there had been a third 737 crash, and in Tom's dream, all the cameras were pointing to him, and a congressman asked, "Why didn't you ground the fleet?"
Unsure of where to look next, and with the trail of evidence getting colder, investigators need a break in the case, and fast.
East Wing 517, you're clear for landing.
On June the 9th, 1996, they finally get the break they've been looking for. Captain Brian Bishop is on final approach to Richmond, Virginia, when, without warning, his east wind jet rolls sharply to the right.
We didn't know to what extent, but we knew we had a problem with the rudder. I turned the yoke the opposite direction, stood on the opposite rudder pedal. The pedal didn't move for me.
For over 30 seconds, the 737 flies in a precarious right bank as Bishop fights to keep it from rolling over. Then suddenly, the unknown forces holding the jet let go, snapping the wings back to horizontal.
In a matter of seconds, it released itself and went back to normal. We had started the checklist. Almost before I could finish the sentence, all of a sudden there was just a wham.
For a second time, the 737 is pushed onto its side. For 30 harrowing seconds, the 737 takes on a life of its own. Then, once again, as quickly as it began, the rollover stops.
After the second time, I looked at the first officer and I said, "Declare an emergency."
Tell the controller we have flight control problems.
As they slow down to land, the risks increase. If a third rollover occurs, they won't have enough airspeed to recover.
I did at some point tell my first officer to look out the window and find a dark spot. It was nighttime and we were looking to avoid a neighborhood or a populated area. And he very calmly responded that, "Hey, here's a spot over here."
But there is no third rollover. Bishop brings Flight 517 in high and fast and lands safely.
Taxiing in is when I realized my legs were shaking. We got the aircraft to the gate, and I did pick up the PA to make an announcement to try to explain what had just happened to these people. And picking up their microphone, I realized there was nothing I could say to make this any better. And probably for the first time in a long time, I was at a loss of words. So I simply put the microphone down and let it go at that.
But Bishop won't remain speechless for long. By the next day, the investigation team has arrived in Richmond.
Flight data recorded it was undamaged, an airplane undamaged. We launched to the scene. The airplane literally didn't move, stayed at its location in the airport until we got down there.
There were a lot of FAA, a lot of NTSB, and they all wanted to talk to us very badly.
It gave the NTSB a tremendous break because suddenly they had a 737 that had had a rudder incident that was intact, and they had a pilot who was alive and who could talk about it.
I think they were much happier to have the airplane than me. I think the airplane probably gave them more to research than I ever could.
NTSB investigators quickly determined that what happened on board Eastwind Flight 517 is alarmingly similar to events on Flights 427 and 585. If they can discover why Bishop's 737 rolled over, they may be able to crack two mysterious and fatal accidents.
And when we said, well, what happened? They said there was something wrong with the rudder pedal. The pedal wouldn't go down. I was standing on the rudder pedal and I couldn't get it to go down. My God.
With Bishop's first-person testimony, investigators immediately zero in on Eastwind's rudder controls. The power control unit is removed, inspected, and then tested again and again. To the frustration of everyone, the unit performs perfectly.
We tested that aircraft as is. It was intact. We went through it completely. We did flight tests with it, and it passed all tests.
After a 5-year hunt for clues, a third mysterious rudder event on a 737, and a live pilot as a witness, Tom Houter still lacks the evidence he needs to crack his case. He decides to push his chief suspect, Flight 427's rudder controls, a little harder.
One fellow mentioned a test they had done in the military of a thermal shock, where if you had the actuator being very cold and put in very hot hydraulic fluid, it would cause it to react in strange ways. So we put together a thermal shock test, and this test was extreme, to say the least.
On August the 26th, 1996, in Valencia, California, NTSB investigators gather to watch the torture test of US Air 427's PCU. After soaking it in dry ice, the PCU is blasted with nitrogen gas to simulate the minus 40-degree temperatures at 10,000 meters. Then it's quickly injected with superheated hydraulic fluid and given the command to start working.
As we were standing there listening to the actuator move left and right, it stopped. And it was not commanded to stop.
It just jammed. Stopped working completely. Take a look.
Systems investigator Greg Phillips now asks that the valve be taken apart and scanned for scratches. They find none.
Look at that. Doesn't leave a trace.
It's a crucial breakthrough to solving an almost perfect crime. Not only have they proven that the valve which controls the rudders can jam, no evidence is left behind. Tom Houter and his team have now found that a small hydraulic valve that controls the rudder of the world's most popular commercial jetliner can jam in the right circumstances. It's an ominous discovery. But incredibly, there's another shocking surprise in store for the investigators. October the 15th, 1996. For the last 5 years, the National Transportation Safety Board has been struggling to crack its toughest case. Two completely separate, but seemingly linked accidents. The crash of United 585 killed 25 passengers and crew. 3 years later, the US Air Flight 427 disaster took another 132 lives. Now, after examining hundreds of clues, investigators have made a surprising discovery. A new test has revealed that under the right circumstances, the hydraulic valve that moves the 737's rudder can jam.
It just jammed.
But the surprises aren't over.
The most important breakthrough came when a Boeing engineer, examining the data from that test, discovered some numbers that indicated the valve at that point had actually reversed.
Whoa. It's a stunning revelation. Not only can the servo valve jam, but it can then function in reverse. It means that any time a pilot tries to correct a rollover by pushing on the rudder might turn in the opposite direction, causing a fatal accident.
And the reversal is like driving your car. You turn to the right, it goes left. You're not going to figure out this failure mode until you go off the road. And in these cases, that's the pilots were faced with, something so unusual that they didn't understand what was happening.
What the hell is this?
They had evidence now that the valve was unique, that the valve not only could jam, but would reverse.
427, emergency!
That would explain why the first officer, Chuck Emmett, would keep his foot on the rudder pedal, because he's thinking, why isn't the plane going right? And he's feeling the plane go to the left.
To the very end, Chuck Emmett pushes hard, hoping his rudder will help him pull out of his deadly spiral. Tragically, he has no way of knowing that he's steering the aircraft straight into the ground.
Ever driven to Colorado Springs and not gotten sick?
Flight attendants prepare for landing.
Satisfied that they've determined the cause of the crash of US Air 427, the NTSB turns its attention to the unsolved case of United 585.
Another 10-knot gain.
Going back to Colorado Springs, you could follow a progression of what the captain was doing. He's close to the ground, and suddenly, under rudder reversal, he puts in a little bit of pedal. The pedal violently pushes his leg back.
Oh, God! Slip!
15 flap!
15!
Rudder reversal certainly fits what I know about this crew and how it fits.
We were able to show the failure mode. It matched the flight data recorder from each aircraft. It fit like a glove. So we now had a lot more information we could apply to United 585. And based on that, we redid the accident report.
Oh my God!
From rudder reversal to impact took less than 10 seconds. 585's flight crew had no chance to save their plane or passengers. In the aftermath of the investigation, sweeping changes were made to improve the safety of the 737 and the entire aviation industry. New training protocols were designed to help pilots react to unusual in-flight events. In the 737 fleet, pilots are now trained on how to react to both rudder hardovers and reversals.
The scenario of the US Air 427 accident, if the crew had the information that we have today, I believe they would have landed safely in Pittsburgh that evening.
The FAA also directed Boeing to redesign the rudder's dual servo valve to eliminate the potential for reversal. Boeing spent hundreds of millions of dollars to replace the valves on thousands of 737s around the world.
One thing we don't like at the safety board is to have an undetermined accident, because then we can't make a change to improve safety. So out of US Air 427, United 585, we have a much safer 737 fleet.
It took NTSB tin kickers 10 years to solve the mysterious crashes of flights 585 and 427, the longest investigation in aviation history.
There are still some people in aviation who don't think the NTSB got it right. But I became convinced after talking to many, many, many people, pilots, engineers, people at Boeing, and spending a lot of time with the investigators, that they did get it right.
Since the replacement of the 737 servo valves, there hasn't been a similar crash of the most popular, most profitable plane in the world. A 747 plummets towards the Pacific Ocean.
People just popped up like popcorn.
This airplane is totally out of control. It is going to crash.
In 2 minutes, China Airlines Flight 006 drops 10 kilometers through the clouds.
Airspeed 270, 280, 290.
The plane begins to tear itself apart as it spirals towards the sea.
And I closed my eye. I thought I was gone.
Altitude 15,000 feet, 12,000 feet, 10,000 feet, Emergency! Emergency!
February the 19th, 1985. A China Airlines flight cruises across the Pacific to Los Angeles. At 12,000 meters, it's racing towards the dawn. For the passengers and crew on board, it's past midnight. A two-man relief crew is in charge of the plane as it sails above the ocean on autopilot. The main crew gets several hours off in the middle of the trip, so they're rested for the landing. But Captain Mumyan Ho is restless.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Even though he's not officially on duty yet, Captain Ho returns to the cockpit.
Thought I'd keep you company.
The captain isn't the only one up. Best friends Sexan Canyo and Alex Knoll have something to celebrate.
I feel like I'm in first class.
It's Sexan's 30th birthday.
I have the longest birthday because I just gained my 12 hours back. And we've been drinking champagne, celebrating 41,000 feet in the air. You know, not too many people get to do that.
Bill Peacock is in first class. He's traveled all over the world for the American government.
There was nothing special. It was a routine commercial flight. I had a very nice first-class seat, sat there and read some books, went to sleep.
By now, the plane is nearing the coast of California.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will shortly be serving you breakfast. For those of you who wish to adjust your watches, the local time in Los Angeles is now 7 a.m.
Sleep well?
Very well, sir. Thank you.
Good morning, Captain.
After their 5-hour break, the flight crew is reunited in the cockpit. Soon after, the plane runs into some stiff winds.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking.
We're experiencing some light air turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelt.
The autopilot is set to keep the plane flying at 470 kilometers an hour. But with the wind blowing hard, it's increasingly difficult to maintain the speed. For the crew, the bumpy ride suddenly gets more worrying.
Engine 4 is giving us weak thrust.
There's a problem with one of the engines. The flight engineer throttles up the engine, but it doesn't respond.
We're losing speed.
Back in economy, Sexan Canyo has also noticed something.
You notice the light in that wing isn't flashing anymore. So why?
I thought there was some light blinking at the tip of the wing. Looked like a cone. But when I look back this time, I didn't see no cone.
Oh, the light in that wing's still flashing.
I think you had a few, buddy. Have a seat.
In the cockpit, the strange situation suddenly gets much worse.
Engine 4 flamed out.
The fourth engine stops working completely.
Take a look at engine out procedures. Work out a 3-engine cruise altitude. Yes,
The problem with the fourth engine isn't a complete surprise. At the pre-flight briefing, Captain Ho was told that a repair crew had worked on engine 4 before the flight. Perhaps the engine still wasn't working properly.
We had a snag advisor on engine 4 before we took off.
Yes, sir.
Maybe that's it.
Without the fourth engine, the plane continues to slow down.
Airspeed 240.
Call Oakland Center and request a lower altitude.
Oakland Center. Dynasty 006, requesting new altitude.
Dynasty 006, stand by.
Reignite engine 4.
Yes, Captain. At this altitude, there isn't much oxygen, so the chances of a successful relight are slim.
No response, Captain.
As the crew try to restart their engine, their plane slowly begins to roll to the right.
Dynasty 006, you're cleared to flight 240.
We're banking right, Captain. Airspeed 230.
As the plane continues to turn and slow down, it's in danger of stalling.
Altitude hold off. Nose down.
Hoping to increase his speed, Captain Ho tries pushing the plane's nose down. Nothing the crew does seems to help. Their jet is banking more and more steeply.
Dynasty Flight 006, Oakland Center, how do you hear me?
Airspeed 220. We're banking right, Captain.
I'm disengaging autopilot.
For the first time, Captain Ho takes manual control of the plane. He struggles with the controls, but the plane has veered into thick cloud, and he can't see the horizon as he tries to keep his jet level.
I've lost ADI.
The ADIs have malfunctioned.
It's going out of limits.
Just minutes after their fourth engine stopped working, the China Airlines flight suddenly stalls and begins falling from the sky.
People just popped up like popcorn, hitting the cabin, and all the tray was flying. Hot tea, pots, noodles, and all the luggage in the compartment were hitting people.
You could hear rivets popping. It sounded like bullets were hitting the outside of the aircraft, which, you know, we're out in the middle of the ocean. Nobody's shooting at us.
At that time, we didn't know we were going to live or die.
China Airlines Flight 006 is out of control and hurtling towards the ocean. A China Airlines jet is tumbling out of the sky. After losing power to one engine, the jet is spinning out of control. It's dropping fast, straight towards the Pacific Ocean.
You can see the stewardesses, all these people who didn't have their seatbelt on, they were flying.
Dynasty 006, Oakland Center, how do you hear me?
The crew are stunned, blindsided by their jet's bizarre behavior.
Engines 1, 2, and 3 have lost thrust. No response, Captain.
Dynasty 006, Oakland Center, how do you hear me?
Airspeed 270, 280.
Dynasty 006, Oakland Center, how do you hear me?
Struggling against the plane's wild motion, the flight engineer tries again to restart his fourth engine.
Ignition negative.
The G-forces are so powerful that the flight engineer is pinned to the control pedestal.
Dynasty 006, Oakland Center, do you copy? You need to see this.
In Oakland, air traffic control spots the plane's sudden descent. In a matter of seconds, the plane falls almost 3,000 meters.
Up to 370, 360, 350.
In the cabin, the G-forces are punishing.
And I closed my eye. I thought I was gone. I thought the plane just blew up in the mid-air.
The plane is about to exceed its maximum speed.
Approaching VMO.
Tumbling madly through the clouds, the 747 finally starts to pull out of its nosedive. As the plane rights itself, the G-forces change direction. The passengers are pressed to the floor, feeling 5 times their normal weight.
I remember looking over at this dignified, older Chinese gentleman who was sitting across the aisle from me. And his face was being contorted like this, like he was lying on his side in a wax museum in a fire. I mean, his face was just all contorted.
As the crew struggles to regain control of the plane, it begins to slow down.
Airspeed 180 knots and falling.
Dynasty 006, Oakland Center. How do you read me?
Airspeed 140 knots and falling.
The jet is still dropping, but not as fast. This could be the crew's chance to regain control.
I knew we were really in trouble because G-forces, instead of being horizontal, started moving around to the vertical. So we were being pushed down into our seats instead of sideways.
As their speed continues to fall, the flight engineer reaches desperately for the engine throttles.
Airspeed 80 knots and falling.
But the engines don't respond.
No response. The engines are flamed out.
After tumbling 3,000 meters in 30 seconds, the jumbo jet plunges again into another free fall.
And the second time when it went down, this time it's plunge. I mean, it went down.
The change is swift. Once again, the passengers feel pulled towards the nose of the plane.
You know, this airplane is totally out of control. It is going to crash. And stuff. We're sliding around and flying around and shoved to one side and then shoved to another side. So it was kind of like being on a boat that the gear is broken loose and it's just going back and forth with the waves. Ugly.
My stomach was up to my throat. You smell people urinating in their pants.
I really made peace with the Lord. And I said, to myself, I said, I've really had a wonderful life. If this is the end, I'm ready to do it.
Up to 250. Airspeed 290.
As the plane spins towards the ocean, the airspeed increases rapidly.
Dynasty 006.
With the crews struggling to control the plane, 6 separate calls from air traffic control go unanswered. The stress of the dive tears the landing gear doors off the plane. In less than a minute, the plane drops 6 kilometers.
Hold on! Let's link arms!
He said, I love you, man. I told him I love you, man. And we said goodbye to our wife. And he said something about his belonging. He gave all his belonging to his wife. And that's when we just start pushing our chair back together.
Altitude, 15,000 feet.
With no visible horizon line, Captain Ho doesn't know which way is up.
We pass VMO.
Without a reference, he can't stop the plane from spinning.
Emergency! Emergency!
After blindly plunging thousands of meters, the plane finally breaks free from cloud.
And when this thing was falling down, it looked like you have a magnifying glass and you went like that, and all of a sudden the white water break becoming closer and closer, faster and faster. It's like incredible, and we thought we were going to die.
Altitude, 12,000 feet.
As he struggles for control, Captain Ho has only 30 seconds before his crippled plane smashes into the ocean.
I can see the horizon.
Altitude, 10,000 feet.
For the first time since beginning his harrowing descent, the captain can now use the horizon line as a reference in leveling the plane. As he tries to pull the plane out of its dive, the passengers pay the price. Their bodies are forced into their seats, battered by another dramatic change in direction.
You know, the G-force was so strong, and I weigh 200 pounds, so my weight was almost 1,200 pounds.
It's a race against time, and the plane starts to win.
ADI is coming back.
As the plane finally begins to level, the attitude indicators return to normal.
ADI is coming in.
More importantly, as mysteriously as the incident began, 3 of the plane's engines regain power.
Engines 1, 2, and 3 are coming back. Engine 4 still negative. Reignite engine 4. Yes, Captain.
Once again, the flight engineer tries to reignite the 4th engine, but this time...
Engine 4 reignited.
For the first time in minutes, the plane is flying under control.
They saved the airplane. They pulled the airplane out of this acrobatic maneuver at an altitude of 9,500 feet. They popped out of the clouds at 11,000 feet, and they had the airplane in stable level flight by 9,500 feet. That was a masterpiece of flying.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. Is anyone hurt?
Do we have a doctor on board?
There's a gentleman sitting behind me, all splattered with blood from hitting the compartment. So we kept flying, and next thing I knew that the whole plane was quiet, real quiet. Nobody talked very much. If they talk, we're whispering, because we don't know, we still don't know we're gonna live or die.
Dynasty 006 fell off my screen, but she's back now.
A new controller, Brian Campbell, has taken over control of Dynasty 006.
Dynasty 006, Oakland Center, do you hear me? Can you fly the plane?
006, we are flamed out. We are... Emergency. We are 9,000. 9,000.
Roger, roger. We have radar contact.
Oakland Center, Dynasty 006, we can control the aircraft.
Roger, roger.
Less than 10 minutes after the start of their problems, everything seems normal again.
Request radar vectors to return to course.
There really is nothing I can do to assist. He's the pilot, he's flying the airplane. I'm going to give him a safe altitude to descend to. I'm giving him a destination. It appeared to me that he was well in control of his aircraft.
Dynasty 006, Oakland Center, are you declaring an emergency? Do you want to divert to San Francisco?
Negative, Oakland Center. Condition normal now. We will continue to Los
Angeles.
Air traffic control clears the plane to climb to 10,500 meters. But a new problem soon arises.
Roger, Oakland Center. Captain, our landing gear is down and walk. Can you bring them up? Negative. The hydraulic fluid in System 1 is empty.
For some reason, the plane's landing gear is down. Hydraulic fluid, which controls the gear and many other parts of the plane, is also leaking away.
Oakland Center, Dynasty 006, request new clearance to maintain flight level 270.
Dynasty 006, Oakland Center. Do you have injuries?
Stand by, Oakland Center.
Sir, are you okay? My head.
One passenger has suffered serious injuries, and 24 others have cuts and bruises.
006, we have at least 2 injuries on board.
Dynasty 006, Oakland Center. Are you declaring an emergency? Do you want to divert to San Francisco?
Stand by, Oakland Center.
Oakland Center, Dynasty 006. We're declaring an emergency. We request a direct route to San Francisco.
Well, they cleared all the other airplanes out of the way. They gave him clear runway, so nobody was waiting. Didn't have to wait for anybody else. He went straight in for a landing.
Dynasty 006, Oakland Center. You are now cleared. You are free to descend at pilot's discretion.
Captain Ho not only has injuries on board, the plane itself has been severely damaged. His rear elevators, which help control the altitude of the plane, don't seem to be working. Without them, landing his jet safely will be extremely difficult.
The problem is, it's a very big airplane and it responds very, very slowly, and you just might not do it before you run out of air. You might hit the ocean. What you need is a very cool head.
Captain Ho must now land using varying amounts of engine thrust. After pulling the plane out of its terrifying dive, if he makes one mistake, Flight 006 could still end in disaster. Nearing the end of a trip across the Pacific Ocean, China Airlines Flight 006 falls suddenly from the sky.
No response! The engine is flamed out!
Emergency! Emergency!
After a terrifying plunge, the crew manages to wrestle the plane level again. But the jet is badly crippled. The elevators aren't working. Without them, Captain Ho has to land mostly by reducing power to his engines. It's a controlled fall towards the runway.
As we came in, we flew over the house in Atherton where I had lived, where my kids had been born. And I looked down and said, boy, this is fitting. If we don't make it down, or if this plane explodes on landing because it's been so badly torqued and ruptured, you know, at least I got to see that. He made one of the best landings I've ever seen. I mean, it was just perfect touchdown.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ho speaking. Wishing you a safe journey. I hope you enjoyed our uneventful flight. Thank you for flying China Airlines.
I thought he was a hero. He saved our life. I mean, how can we fell very... We didn't know how far we fell that time. And we thought he was a hero and everything was fine.
On the ground, the full extent of the damage to the plane can be seen.
I saw this enormous piece of extremely complicated machinery that is much larger than most buildings, sitting there on the tarmac with bits ripped off it. Parts of the entire tailplane at the end were ripped off, as though a tornado had come through or a crane had been in and ripped pieces out of it. It was a very sobering experience.
It's clear why the crew had such a hard time landing the plane. Enormous chunks of the tail are missing, either torn off by the stress of the dive or crushed when the landing gear doors broke loose. If the damage had been much more severe, the crew wouldn't have been able to regain control of their jet. 24 passengers have minor injuries. Only one requires hospitalization, but is soon released. A near disaster was avoided. But what had gone wrong in the first place? The National Transportation Safety Board arrived that very day and launched their investigation. The cockpit voice recorder is sent to Washington, but it's designed to tape over itself every 30 minutes. None of what happened in the cockpit during the terrifying plunge from the sky remains.
Without a cockpit voice recorder, we had to reconstruct what the crew said and how they interpreted things and what was going on in the cockpit to the best of our abilities with the other data that was available to us.
A record of the plane's instrument activity during the flight has been captured by the flight data recorder. But again, the team runs into a problem. The flight data recorder experienced unprecedented stress during the dive. There were electrical interruptions too, which cause gaps in the recording. The FDR information will have to be recovered using painstaking techniques of reconstruction. It's a frustrating start to the investigation. Investigators begin with what they do have. Passengers and crew report that just before the failure of the jet's fourth engine, the plane flew through unexpected turbulence. Had this caused the engine to fail? Satellite weather maps revealed that there was indeed heavy air turbulence over the Pacific. But it wasn't severe enough to cause engine failure. The jet's 4 engines are tested and studied. Even after the horrific dive through the sky, they're found to be in working order. However, given the previous history of problems with Engine 4, it receives particular scrutiny.
They had an anomaly with one of the engines. They believed that the engine had flamed out or that there was something seriously wrong with the engine.
The wear on a small throttle valve trimmer is measured. It's worn down by only 4/1000th of an inch, but that's enough to restrict the fuel flow to Engine 4.
Engine 4 is giving us good thrust.
Investigators determined that at 12,000 meters, Engine 4 did indeed deliver weaker than normal thrust. It's known as a hung engine. The aircraft logbook reveals that Engine 4 had been written up on 2 previous occasions just the week before. Perhaps the engine wasn't properly fixed, which led to the China Airlines mishap. The NTSB decided to dig deeper into the history of maintenance on Engine 4.
We had a snag advisor on Engine 4 before we took off.
Yes, sir.
Maybe that's it.
But after weeks of investigation, the NTSB concludes that the engine didn't need to be replaced. All the repairs were done according to the book. A faulty engine was not the cause of the accident. And even with the loss of one engine, the plane shouldn't have been in immediate danger.
Engine 4 flamed out.
A 747 is designed to fly on only 3 engines.
The loss of thrust on a 4-engine airplane is a minor event. It's an event, you have to take care of it, but the airplane is easily retrimmed and the airplane will fly on 3 engines with no difficulty.
We're banking right, Captain. Airspeed 230.
The airplane is perfectly capable of flying. It's not as efficient because it's got this big, round, drag-producing device out there, not producing any thrust. But given that it's not going to get quite so many miles per gallon, otherwise it's perfectly flyable.
Take a look at engine out procedures. Work out a 3-engine cruise altitude.
Yes, Captain.
There are standard procedures to follow in the case of an engine failure, but the crew of the China Airlines flight hadn't followed them. They tried to reignite the engine immediately instead of descending.
Reignite Engine 4.
Yes, Captain.
They attempted a restart much too high. You are supposed to attempt to restart an engine only below 30,000 feet. They were at 41,000.
What is a little curious to me is why they didn't use the normal relight procedure. They were starting to try to relight the engine at altitude, and that would likely not relight.
No response, Captain.
It's a mistake, but it shouldn't have led to the plane spiraling out of control. So how had a manageable problem turned into a near disaster?
I've lost ADI.
The ADIs have malfunctioned.
It's going out of limits.
To get more information on what was happening in the cockpit, investigators interview the flight crew.
I heard the captain report the ADI was lost. And then I saw the standby ADI was also going out of limits.
The crew tell investigators that their ADIs, which measure how level the plane is, weren't working.
They could have said, this can't possibly be right. And looking at their indicators, can't possibly be right, and therefore they must have failed.
The attitude indicator had indicated a position so implausible that it looked like it had to be a failed instrument. This couldn't be what the plane was really doing.
But in fact, when the ADIs are studied by the NTSB, they're all found to be perfectly normal.
When we started banking right, engine 4 was already flamed out. We started to descend faster, and engines 1, 2, and 3 also failed.
Engines 1, 2, and 3 have lost thrust.
NTSB investigators are even more confused when the crew tells them that all of their engines had failed.
No response, Captain.
With the exception of engine 4, the flight data recorder indicates that the other 3 engines were working the entire flight.
Ignition negative.
If the engines had all failed, there would have been a host of other problems, such as cabin depressurization, but that didn't happen.
Engines 1, 2, and 3 are coming back.
Finally, when we descended lower in altitude, 1, 2, and 3 came back, and we were able to reignite engine number 4.
Engine 4 reignited.
At the end of the dive, the crew had the plane under full power. It was a remarkable recovery. But to investigators, it's a puzzle. The story the crew is telling doesn't match up with the evidence they've uncovered. After months of investigation, the NTSB team slowly pieced together a reenactment of the plane's near catastrophe over the Pacific. It includes information from the reconstructed flight recorder, personal interviews, and the air traffic control transcript. When the work is complete, there's only one conclusion. Apart from a problem with a small valve, there was nothing wrong with the 747 before it plunged from the sky. In fact, it was the crew that made a series of fateful decisions that almost crashed the plane. Just after 10 o'clock Pacific time, engine 4 starts to lose thrust.
Engine 4 is giving us weak thrust.
The flight engineer struggles to fix the problem. But investigators discover that he doesn't take one of the most basic steps he should have. He leaves the engine's bleed air valve on. The bleed air valve takes air generated by the engine to help cool the plane. When an engine isn't working properly, the valve is supposed to be closed, so the engine can use all available air to restart.
It's a little puzzling that the flight engineer didn't shut off bleed air. And in my mind, the most likely reason for it is that he didn't expect to be told to restart the engine at 41,000 feet. And so when the captain instructed him to try some restarts, he just kind of wasn't ready with his checklist. He was doing something out of order. And that's why it didn't occur to him to shut down the bleed air. The end result is that the engine, which is slow to start, won't start at all.
Unwittingly, the flight engineer has started a ticking clock. Engine 4 is slowly losing its ability to stay lit.
We're losing speed.
With more engine power on the left wing than the right, the China Airlines flight begins turning.
In order to keep it from turning to the right, the proper thing to do would have been to step on the rudder. That would have produced a twisting force, so to speak, that would have overcome the imbalance of the engines.
But instead of adjusting the rudder himself, Captain Ho continues to let the autopilot fly the jet. The autopilot is designed not to move the rudder. The autopilot can adjust the ailerons and spoilers on the plane's wings, but these flaps aren't strong enough to overcome the imbalance that the plane is experiencing. Without the help of the rudder, the plane's turn becomes steeper and steeper.
Now, it's possible that he'd forgotten that the autopilot didn't use the rudder. He may have been assuming all along that the autopilot was just flying the airplane the way a human being would have, which it wasn't.
Engine 4 flamed out.
Investigators discover that after losing power to his fourth engine, Captain Ho continues to leave the autopilot on. He doesn't take complete control of the plane. He doesn't adjust the plane's rudder with his left foot.
Airspeed 240.
He didn't use the rudder to compensate for the lack of thrust on the right outboard engine. The airplane started to lose speed, and one thing led to another, and in the end, it was really that little error of airmanship, the failure to step on that left rudder pedal, that triggered everything else.
Reignite engine 4.
Yes, Captain.
Rather than taking control of flying the plane, Captain Ho's attention seems to be focused on his engine problem, something that his flight engineer could handle on his own.
No response, Captain.
It's really critical that attention be paid to flying the airplane. But it's happened over and over again in aviation that the crew gets focused on a problem with a system, in this case an engine, but it could have been a light bulb, it could have been any other malfunction. And if everybody's focused on that and nobody is flying, then they're not prepared for what's happening to the airplane.
The plane enters a critical moment. It's about to flip on its side and enter a nosedive. The NTSB believes that the captain was concentrating on his airspeed indicator, but seemingly fails to notice the instrument directly beside it, his attitude indicator. This instrument would have warned him that his plane was starting to roll alarmingly to the right.
They concentrated on one part of the phenomenon and lost the full picture. And as they lost the full picture, they lost apparently a very important part of any instrument flying, which is the scan. You look at all of the primary instruments, one after the other, and whatever is going on, you look at them all constantly.
During the plane's nosedive, it flies through thick cloud. With no visual horizon as a reference, the flight crew must trust their instruments to level the plane.
I've lost ADI.
Instead, what investigators believe happened is that the crew became spatially disoriented. They decided that their instruments were failing.
They simply didn't believe what they were seeing, and they thought they had lost their attitude instruments. They hadn't lost their attitude instruments. The airplane was, in fact, embarking on an aerobatic maneuver.
The most probable reason for all three crew members believing something so unlikely as that all attitude indicators could malfunction in the same way at the same time is that the way in which they malfunctioned was so unexpected and strange that it didn't seem to correspond to any possible thing that the airplane could be doing. The airplane had in fact rolled over on its back and gone into a vertical dive, and that's something that Boeing 747s don't typically do.
As the plane begins tumbling towards the ocean, another critical lapse in judgment occurs.
The standby ADI was also going out of limits. I tried to restart.
During interviews, the flight engineer told the NTSB that all three of the plane's working engines failed.
We started to descend faster, and engines 1, 2, and 3 also failed.
But the flight data recorder shows that, in fact, they were still working. In the heat of the crisis, the engineer had made an enormous mistake.
Engines 1, 2, and 3 have lost thrust.
The investigation reveals that as the plane fell, the thrust in each engine was indeed reduced dramatically. But the cause wasn't engine trouble. The engine throttles had been lowered to idle in an attempt to slow the furious fall of the jet. It was something the engineer missed in the chaos of the dive.
You can understand why the flight engineer might have been confused about this situation if he had not seen the captain pull the power to idle on the engines. He would reasonably assume that the fact that they went to idle was a problem rather than intentional.
Investigators also believe that they know why the engines didn't give the crew more power when the engineer tried to throttle them up. The cold temperatures at 9,000 meters would stop them from responding quickly.
No response, Captain!
But in the heat of the moment, the engineer could have taken their slow response as another indication that they failed. The NTSB discovers that indeed gauges in the generator panel behind the engineer showed that the 3 engines were still firing.
Ignition negative!
But the gravitational force became so powerful, the engineer couldn't look back. After months of painstaking recreation, the NTSB investigators believe they understand what happened inside the cockpit of China Airlines Flight 006. But what they don't understand is why. The crew's medical records are examined. Was there something wrong with the captain that might explain the bizarre behavior? Nothing turns up.
You know, it wasn't just the Three Stooges who, won a trip on a 747 or something. It was a trained crew, highly experienced, thousands of hours.
How could an experienced crew make so many fundamental mistakes? The investigators find the answers in the hours before the incident. What they uncover is a potential danger that affects pilots around the world. In 1985, a series of small pilot errors lead to a terrifying plunge from the sky. Spinning wildly out of control, a China Airlines flight tumbled 10 kilometers towards the Pacific Ocean. By the time the crew regained control, the plane was badly damaged. Amazingly, everyone on board survived. Investigators have uncovered a series of mistakes which nearly led to the death of everyone on board China Airlines Flight 006. But how could an experienced, well-trained and healthy crew make so many mistakes? The NTSB team decides to examine all of the factors affecting human behavior, including a new field of research.
For the first time, as far as I know, in a report, the circadian rhythms, the biorhythms, the day and night functioning of the body was seriously taken into account as a possible explanation of why an extremely experienced Boeing 747 captain didn't notice things that to other pilots might have seemed obvious, such as the fact that his airplane was busy flipping on his back when he was attempting to deal with an engine problem.
Although Captain Ho had the required 15 hours off duty before flying that day, the NTSB investigators take a closer look at the captain's schedule before the night of the flight.
I do not think I was fatigued. I can't say I slept well during the flight.
This accident occurred at what would be about 2 a.m. local time. And that's pretty significant. Most people are asleep around 2 a.m. So this incident occurred at a point in his, what are called circadian rhythms, in his body clock, where he would be at his deepest sleep. I remember also that he had gone back there was a crew rest area on the 747, and he said he'd rested for 5 hours and slept for 2. But another thing I remember from his interview is he said, you never really sleep well on the airplane.
Captain never sleep well during the flight. I worked many years for this airline, but I never had this problem before.
That seemed like a very true statement. It's hard to get a really solid sleep on the airplane, particularly if you're the person in command, as he was. So, putting it all together, we saw this was an experienced crew, a qualified crew, and they were flying on a schedule that would make them susceptible to some of the negative or adverse effects of fatigue.
During 6 flights in the previous 6 days, Captain Ho had covered a total of 18 time zones.
Thought I'd keep you company.
The NTSB research suggests that desynchronisis, or jet lag, may have been a cause.
And I think all these factors certainly would have contributed to his performing at less than his full potential at the time.
Investigators also take a closer look at the very machinery that is supposed to make long-distance flying easier.
Take a look at engine out procedures. Work out a 3-engine cruise altitude.
Yes, Captain.
We have people in the front of airplanes because we believe that in circumstances which nobody has foreseen, the human being in the front of the airplane can react creatively, can solve a problem that nobody has thought about before in real time. And automation can't solve problems that nobody has thought about before in real time in quite the same way.
The NTSB concludes that possibly fatigued from air travel and bored by the monotony of his tasks,
We're banking right, Captain.
I'm disengaging autopilot.
the captain relied on his autopilot for too long. When he should have taken direct control, he hesitated, trusting his systems.
That is obviously a failure. The crew didn't behave as they should have behaved. Pilot error.
As a result of the China Airlines near mishap and other incidents around the same time, aircraft manufacturers began to rethink the design of their automated systems.
The idea of the automation is that it's going to help the human do the human's job. It's going to help the human take the airplane from the gate to the gate at the other end, and it's going to help along the way.
Boeing makes use of this particular incident to say we still want the crew to have full authority so that they can move the controls as far as it's physically possible to move them and to manage the airplane, even if it may bend the airplane. It is better to do that than to restrict the pilot's authority and then have him guess whether or not he's in charge or the computer's in charge.
Whatever mistakes the flight crew made that day, they did succeed in their ultimate task.
They flew the airplane well. They did an excellent job with the approach afterward. They were careful with the airplane. They knew the airplane had been damaged. They didn't know the severity of it. They were gentle with the maneuvering and yet tested enough to make sure that they wouldn't get themselves in further trouble as they made the approach to landing.
The one big thing they did right, and one only ever needs to do one big thing, is they saved the airplane. And in principle, that's all you ever need to do right when something happens to your airplane. You need to save the airplane and you need to save the passengers, and that's what they did.
How can you forget something like that? That I survived through that. So it's hard for me to forget that I was lucky and it wasn't my time yet.
The pilot saved our lives. He got us into it, but he got us out of it.
And perhaps there was one other hero that day, the Boeing 747 itself. It was put through maneuvers and stresses that far outweighed its known limits. And yet, despite it all, the aircraft survived and landed safely.